first line this morning. No disciple is superior to the teacher. And I thought back to many years ago, back in 1986, when I first became a friar. I was 19 years old. Yes, I'm 53. And just a kid when I became a Franciscan. And I lived in New York City on 31st Street at St. John's Church. 2 blocks away was St. Francis Church, also run by a different group of Franciscans, another branch of the order. So I was maybe 2-3 weeks there. I was freshly there and, all excited. And I said, let me go down to confession over at St. Francis Church down the block. So I walked 2 blocks to St. Francis Church and I'm in confession and I sit down and I say, forgive me, Father. And it was the old confessional with the sliding doors, So I said, forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. It's been 2 weeks since my last confession. I'm a postulate with the Franciscans down the street. And all of a sudden, the little confessional door to the screen slammed and echoed through the church. And then it opened a little bit and he said, just kidding. I never forget how joyful that priest was. And how even though he took sin serious, and even though he was a true and wonderful, wonderful priest, he always had joy. And he was a man who would serve people so beautifully. In sometimes most tragic situations, but always had a sense of joy about him. And I never forgot that important lesson of joy. Like you, many, many years ago on September 11th, I remember where I was and what I was doing. I was in Ohio at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, and my friend called me up and said, turn the TV on, and plane hit the towers. And I ran downstairs, I turned the TV on, thinking it was some sort of little Fresno jet that hit it and bounced off like when the plane hit the Empire State Building years and years ago. And I thought I was watching a rerun a few minutes later when I saw the second plane come in and hit the towers. And like you, I just stood there most of the day staring at the television, trying to calculate in my head the amount of people who worked in those towers, over 50,000. The hundreds of thousands that passed through the towers each and every day on the subways, and I couldn't just pull together how many lives may have been lost as I'm watching the towers burn. And like you, I fell to my seat when I saw the towers fall. Never in my wildest dreams would I see these beautiful symbols of New York fall to the ground and crumble like pancakes as if it was just nothing. These beautiful towers that would turn silver in the morning as the sun rose and gold at night when the sun set. These beautiful towers that, as I said, I would stand upon as a child and watch the sun set upon them, and how beautiful that was. I began to not only think about numbers, but all of a sudden names came to mind. My Uncle Frank, who worked across the street. My friend Joe, who was a fireman, whose firehouse protected the towers. And I stood there for so long. And I'll never forget watching the video of them carrying out Father Michael Judge, the confessor, my confessor. Like all the firemen and the policemen, Father Michael Judge wasn't running out of the towers, he was running in. They were running in to pull people out. He was running in to prepare them for death, to anoint them, to do what a priest does best. Sure, Father Michael had some struggles in life. He was a great confessor, but I also knew that he was also a man of great charity. And how beautiful that this priest died among the firemen to whom he was a chaplain to for many years, just trying to bring consolation to souls as they died. I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided with a priest friend, we'd drive through the night and get to New York City. And I arrived on the scene. I was handed a helmet, gloves, goggles, mask, far more complex than what you're wearing now, because the smell in the air was never unforgettable. The taste of the air was horrendous. Trying to breathe in the midst of the dust, the stench, hard to even explain what it smelled like. Seeing fire trucks twisted, cars toppled. It was like a movie scene. Surreal, worse than a war scene, I would think. I asked where I can help. I was directed down to the towers, and talking to lieutenants, they said, Father, they need help at the morgue. There was a makeshift morgue set up with a tent, and was a deacon, had been sitting there for hours upon hours, and he was covered in soot. This poor deacon had seen so much, and he handed me his holy water bottle, his prayers for the dead, and said, "I'm going home, you got this." And for the next 4 days, 20 hours a day, my friend and I would stand, either one of us at the pile, one at the morgue, and we would speak to and pray with the firemen and policemen. And every time a body bag came through, it was opened, we'd pray the prayer for the dead and bless the body, or whatever remains were there. It was amazing to watch the firemen coming in from all over the country. Clean uniforms, a shovel over their shoulder with a skip to the step. And then you would see them hours later wandering aimlessly, covered in soot, not knowing what to do and how to handle it. One moment really stands out for me very strongly. I was talking to a lieutenant, and we were standing there together, talking a bit about faith and so forth, and we're staring at the pile. He had lost so many of his own firemen in that pile. Flames were shooting out of various spots, steel melting. It was like looking into a pit of hell. And the fireman looked at me and he said, "Father, with this evil, there must be a God greater than it. There must be." I never forget that reflection, that there we were standing in the midst of one of the most evil acts in history. Over 3,000 people lost their lives in New York, not to mention those who lost their lives in the Pentagon and in the fields of Pennsylvania. Men and women who gave their lives to save the president and to save any further death. And here he was, looking at this pile. And instead of being filled with anger and rage, which he had every right to feel, his mind was drawn to God, that there must be a God greater than such evil. Not long after that, they found the steel cross. This piece of steel melted together that formed a perfect cross that the firemen then raised over the pile. One of the firemen said to me, "Father, this is two symbols for us. One, God is with us. Secondly, this is nothing more than a graveyard." It truly was, because after the first day, no more than 20 people came out of that pile alive. There were so many heroes that day. So many men and women who gave their lives rescuing other lives, police officers, first responders, firemen, regular lay people, priests, so many heroes of that day who risked their lives, who gave their lives for the sake of others. There was heroes in friendship. Two men, the story of the two men in the towers on the stairwell calling their families, and he wouldn't leave the fellow in the wheelchair. He was going to stay with him to the very end, and he did. Heroism of friendship, that he would not let this man die alone in those towers. So many tragic stories of those days. But yet what we saw was so beautiful, of a nation coming together, standing side by side. I think today when I see these riots in the streets and I see all these horrible things going on, this quote-unquote division, and I think to myself, we have forgotten. We've forgotten the message of unity and power that came to us that day. New York was such a strange time then. People looked at each other. That doesn't happen in New York. They waved to each other. They said hello. Firemen would be buying something, getting stuff for themselves, and the person behind them would say, "I got it. Go on." It's so kind. The kindness was incredible. It was such an amazing time. One cop said to me, he says, "Father, I'm driving down here, and everybody's lined up in the streets. They're waving to me. They're clapping. I'm looking at my badge. Am I still a New York City cop? I'm not used to seeing all 5 fingers." Have we forgotten the beautiful message of this day? That in tragedy we stood together so strong as one nation under God. We felt so indivisible. Today I pray for our country particularly, that we remember the lost and the fallen. We remember the heroism. We remember the beauty of those who laid down their lives. But we also remember the patriotism of this day. Remember what it was like to stand shoulder to shoulder. Black, white, Hispanic, Oriental, it didn't matter. We were not members of various races on this day. We were members of one race, the human race. Whether you were black or white or Hispanic or Oriental, you were covered in white dust at ground zero. It blotted out any distinction, any distinction. So many men and women who remember that day and how important it is for us to remember. But we don't belong to one particular race of black or white or Hispanic or Oriental or whatever. We belong to the one human race, the human race. And that never should we ever inflict evil on one another. But we should always seek to truly care, to truly love one another, defend each other, protect each other, seek the good of the other. Today we remember the fallen. Remember those who suffered because of this evil act today, those who've lost family members and loved ones, children who never knew their parents. We remember those who died after it because they died from breathing in those horrible fumes, got cancer and other various diseases because of what they breathed in. And let me tell you, it was bad. I was coughing up gunk until April, gunk out of my lungs. Remember all those who continue to suffer from it. And let us never forget that we are truly one nation under God, and we should stand indivisible as one nation. That we should fight for the liberty of all. That we should do our best to make sure that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and that pursuit of happiness. As our Declaration of Independence says, these are God-given rights. May we remember this day the beauty of love that was shown to us in the midst of that evil. And remember that no matter how evil can be, God is always greater than it. May God bless you, and Merry Christmas.